Hi, this is Elizabeth Perez, and I did my article on educational philosophy and theory. The title of my article is How is Education Possible? Preliminary Investigations for a Theory of Education. Ralph van der Straeten, School of Education, Utrecht University, the Netherlands. He's currently at Sarton Center for History of Science. He's a faculty of political and social sciences, specifically sociology. Gert J.J. Biesta, School of Education, University of Exeter, UK. He's currently at Brunel University in London. He is a professor of education and the director of research. Now, how is education possible? What factors are in play when education is occurring? Where and how does education occur? Many believe education happens during a lecture, during a science project, or during a memorable experience. This article explores the space in which education occurs. The space being described is not necessarily a physical space, but rather a moment of intersubjectivity, which is the existence among conscious minds. The article explores a linear progression of education from pre-18th century to Enlightenment and Kant's definition of Enlightenment, Arendt's notion of natality, and the idea of plurality, combining all to describe this space of learning. Now, education is not the educator that educates, but rather the educational situation that makes way for learning. Now we'll go deeper into that. Now, pre-Enlightenment, appeal to nature up until the 18th century. Until the 18th century, an appeal to nature was absolutely necessary in the area of education. The limits and the conditions of effective education relied on practical activity and were dependent on nature. The purpose of education was to eliminate the unfavorable qualities of human beings and stimulate the good ones. This reminds me a little of Thomism mode of educational philosophy. In a time when virtue and morality was deemed as an objective set of standards. The Enlightenment brought forth an epistemological priority on ego. We'll go into Enlightenment on the next slide. But same with the pre-18th century. So with this idea, this reminded me a lot of Thomism. With man is free because he is rational. Man will not man's will is not free relative to God, but relative to the inability of any finite good to compel the will to choose it. And nothing would be better than anything else if it were not loved more by God. So this pre-enlightenment mode of thinking. Now going along with the progress, enlightenment. Enlightenment focuses on the individual. Significance and virtue was placed on the individual, very different from pre-Enlightenment area. That's why it's the Enlightenment. This idea switched virtue and significance onto the individual rather than on unpredictable nature or God. So suddenly man was this free-thinking being. Man's subjective interpretations and opinions, this interpreted knowledge, all of these things were valid. No longer was man just this humble servant of God. Man was a free-thinking creature, which is very empowering. Now going into Kant. Kant's idea of education is the freedom to make public use of one's reason and freedom to act accordingly, and hence become a free acting being. Now, this article dives into Kant's definition of enlightenment. Kant stated that enlightenment is man's release from his self-incurred tutelage. The term tutelage is man's inability to use their own understanding without being directed by someone else. According to Kant, such habit is self-incurred when its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolution and courage to use it without the direction from another. Kant's definition of enlightenment is parallel to the article's argument, stating that education only occurs when the student uses the tools presented by the educator. Now here's some quotes by Kant. Free thinking is a destination for man, but this destination can only be reached through education. Man is the only creature that has to be educated. Now let's go into intersubjectivity. We touched a little on it earlier. Intersubjectivity, existing between conscious minds shared by more than one conscious mind. So this kind of just reminds me of, I'm picturing a classroom when I think of intersubjectivity. I'm picturing, this is what I see. People being a part of like this greater thing. For example, like a church, professions, generations, nations, political affiliations, or like I said, like being in a classroom, being part of this greater educational institution. Now, what exactly is intersubjectivity? Well, intersubjectivity is the aspect of thinking that's not solely personal, but it's not universal either. So this is a pretty good picture of intersubjectivity. So you have two people, they're thinking about something, but this guy has his own perspective, this guy has his own perspective, and it comes together, making this like somewhat common yet kind of different perspective or conclusion. Now, intersubjectivity, is it significant for understanding the process of learning? Yes, I believe so, because I mean, this is the kind of educational model that we have in school, I think. I mean, you have a whole classroom full of students, you have the educator presenting the information, and ideally, you want your students to derive their own conclusions. Now, Arendt's natality. With each birth, something uniquely new comes into the world. This new beginning can make itself felt in the world. It possesses the capacity for beginning something new. Human interaction is balanced and inherently unpredictable. So let's go back to the first bullet point, natality. With each birth, something uniquely new comes into the world. This is powerful. This means that each person, each baby born, has the potential to bring forth something new, to create something new. Now, if you keep that in mind, if you think about that and you apply it to your classroom for a second, just think about each student has the potential to make a contribution, and it's going to be something absolutely new, or derive a conclusion with a very unique perspective. This gives significance to every perspective in the classroom. This leading us into plurality. Plurality, the difference does not pre-exist the interaction. It only exists in interaction. So you won't see difference until you begin to interact with someone else. That's when you start confronting your differences. That's when you start seeing, oh, there's a different perspective other than mine. Now, the in-between space is the space of the enunciation of difference. Now, according to this article, Van Straten and oh, I forgot his name, and Biesta, they claim that that is when learning takes place, in this area of difference, in this area, the space of in-between emerging reality. That is where education takes place. So plurality is a tool of the social system. The system educates the person to preserve his or her proper perspective, because it enables the experience that the other person's use of different perspectives to act or interpret situations. To what degree can this plurality be explicitly dealt with and what kind of arrangements are necessary to allow this. Plurality, so every multiple perspective that is present within that setting, within your classroom. So we spoke on the appeal to nature up until the 18th century, which I felt was kind of a glimpse of Thomism. Enlightenment, then we dived into Kant's idea of enlightenment, to use your interpretation of knowledge without being given a directive. You take initiative and you put it to use. Intersubjectivity, which we discussed, is existing between conscious minds shared by conscious minds, this diagram here. Arendt's natality, claiming that with each birth something uniquely new comes into the world, which led us into plurality, the multiple perspectives. Now we're going to talk about in-between space. It is not the educator that educates, it's the educational situation. That's the in-between space. A new reality that cannot be reduced to either the teacher or student. Modern educative systems operate through difference. Now, what is the difference? The difference can be whatever perspective the student may already have, or the teacher may have. Here's a diagram. This interaction here, this is the in-between space. You can support the in-between space with scaffolding, with cultural tools, and you can increase the learner's ability to understand when you present different modes of learning. This is the teacher and this is a student. Now let's go. Education happens when education can never be understood as the process where a teacher simply molds a student, because what is presented by the teacher is not passively taken but actively used by the student. Education must take into account the individual persons and social systems. Only then is it possible to ask whether and how the possible worlds of an individual change as a result of being involved in educational relations. Arendt's idea of natality describes that with each birth, something uniquely new comes into the world, and it possesses the capacity for beginning something new. Education takes place in an in-between space, which, although constituted by the interaction between teacher and student, has to be understood as a new reality that cannot be reduced to either of them. This was once called educational interaction. That's this right here. This is the interaction, that in-between space. This is where education is happening. Now, clinical application. This idea of emerging reality among the teacher and student, placing the possibility of education in an in-between space, and claiming that education only occurs when the student uses the information presented by the educator, reminded me of constructivism. Learners construct knowledge out of their experience. This is very similar to this diagram here that we're seeing, because their experience it's going to be based off their perspective. It's going to be a manifestation of their subjective reality. Now, in this case, learners are constructing knowledge through their experience in between space with their educator. Depending on students' subjective preservation, their process of this new knowledge will differ from peers and even from their own educator. So as mentioned in plurality, where is it? It's mentioned in Arendt's natality. Human interaction is boundless and inherently unpredictable. So during this in-between space, you may be trying to express an idea which is already going to be vague, or even if you're specific as you can be, the learner, it's up to them. It's unpredictable how they're going to intake that information, interpret it, and process it and then present it later. It is unpredictable because there are so many factors involved.